Hey everyone! A quick disclaimer. If you think that mentioning political figures or fact-checking them is woke, fake news, or part of some elaborate trans plot to bring the world to its knees and force femme the population using mind control and wind-powered estrogen, first of all, who are you and why have you been reading my diary? Second, let's be clear. Today's video is political. It features President Donald Trump, and it's going to involve me calmly, methodically, and with maybe just a little pinch of righteous fury, fact-checking some absolutely unhinged statements he made during a recent trip to Scotland, where he rambled about topics that would make Don Quixote look like a well-adjusted man with a stable LinkedIn profile. He claimed credit for ending wars that wrapped up before he entered politics. He grumbled about European trade diplomacy. He complained that no one has said thank you for the US food aid to Gaza, which, spoiler alert, isn't just from the US and definitely not all his doing. Then he pivoted, naturally, to bragging about his golf courses. From there, he accused Europe of treating US automakers unfairly, declared that wind turbines are the worst way to generate electricity, and blamed wind turbines for killing whales. All while his guest, European Commission President Ursula von Leyen, sat across from him like she was astral projecting into a timeline where this didn't happen. I did consider doing this video completely straight-laced. Just the facts. But let's be honest, I've never done anything straight, and when we're dealing with this level of disinformation from the supposed leader of the free world, a bit of derision isn't just deserved, it's a public service. Content note, I'm also speaking here as someone who survived multiple SA abuses as a child. Humour is, for me, part of therapy and part armour. And if you walked a similar path, I hope laughter helps you too. I also ran the first version of this script past my beloved, who listened patiently and then told me in no uncertain terms that I needed to either go full PBS or, and I quote, give it full Queenie. So here we are, just minus the giant doggo and the over-the-top toffee accent because, well, there even are some lines I won't cross to debunk the president. If you're here for sarcasm, side eyes, and facts with a side of flame, then buckle up, hun, you are in the right place. If not, that's totally okay. There are some perfectly pleasant videos linked below that do not feature politics, opinions, or indeed any mention of the fact that I am the gay. You're free to watch those instead, I won't judge. Much. Oh, and don't worry, just like CBS, we've run this past our government-appointed bias checker and they said... Well, I can't actually really tell what they said because we gagged them and tied them up in a cupboard, but I'm sure it's fine. This past week alone, as the media zeroed in on newly surfaced evidence tying Donald Trump to registered sex offender Jeffery Epstein and their documented sexual objectification of young women and girls, the former president did what he does best: deny, deflect, and distract. In a transparent effort to yank the spotlight away from his past, Trump's been throwing everything at the wall, accusing his political opponents of crimes he can't substantiate, and even pushing out AI-generated images that reek of the same racism he and his father became infamous for back in the 1980s. And no, that's not hyperbole. In 1973, the US Department of Justice sued both Fred and Donald Trump for racially discriminating against black apartment seekers routinely, marking applications with a C for coloured and instructing agents to lie about vacancies. They settled under a consent decree but never admitted guilt. So when President Trump shared an AI deepfake portraying former President Barack Obama as O.J. Simpson fleeing police in a white Ford Bronco, complete with a distorted, memeified version of Vice President Vance driving one police cruiser and Donald Trump himself driving another, it wasn't just a cringe-inducing attempt at deflection. It was pure Trump. Blunt force racism, now algorithmically enhanced, because why settle for dog whistles when you can go full foghorn? And just as that particular firestorm picked up steam, the Speaker of the House handed Trump a golden opportunity. By adjourning early, the House effectively blocked a vote that would have compelled the release of the Epstein files to Congress. So, what did President Trump do next to celebrate? He jetted off to Scotland for a round of golf at Turnberry, his own resort, where he hosted European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen to discuss a proposed trade agreement between the US and the European Union. The stated goal? To lower the cost of European imports for American consumers. But before any actual diplomacy could happen, the two held a frankly one-sided press conference. Von der Leyen remained stoically silent while Trump fielded questions from the US press corps and European journalists alike. Many questions were asked. Few, if any, were directly answered. Instead, the so-called leader of the free world took the opportunity to praise himself and his properties, rehash grievances against his predecessors, take credit for ending wars he had nothing to do with, bash US allies, and launch yet another personal crusade against wind power. To make sure I fact-check what he said accurately, here's the video from that press conference. I'll be cutting in between clips to correct the record, point out the misdirection, and try to contextualise what's actually going on. I mean, Colbert needs something to work with before that just-approved CBS merger ends his show and replaces him with America's answer to Ri Shun-hee, right? First, let's clear up some misnomers about the US and European auto industry. President Trump said this.
No, Europe is very closed. We don't sell cars into Europe. We don't sell essentially agriculture of any great degree. They want to have their farmers do it, and they want to have their car companies do it. I'm not saying anything that nobody knows. We have a rough situation. If we want to sell cars in Europe, we're not allowed to. And as you know, they sell millions and millions of cars, Mercedes, BMW, so many different, Volkswagen, so many different cars, and so many millions of cars.
Okay, I don't know where the president got this information from, but it's so far from the truth it's coming back on itself like an Escher painting. The US auto industry has been exporting its cars to Europe for years. Ford, a US brand, is massive in Europe, and last year, 3.3% of all cars sold in Europe were made by Ford. Admittedly, not all of Ford's European cars were made in the US, most were actually made in Europe. But Ford is a US company, at least it was the last time I checked. Tesla has, historically at least, also sold well in Europe. I say historically because after that certain right arm incident at President Trump's inauguration, Europeans have become a little less eager to sign Reich on the dotted line for their next EV. But those thoughts aside, Tesla is a US company. Let's not forget either that Jeep, part of the Stellantis group, is a US brand. So too is Cadillac, a brand that's continued to sell well in Europe long after GM's Chevrolet brand left the market there. And in 2023, the US exported 150,000 vehicles from the US to Europe. And that is after all of those aforementioned US brands that have bases in Europe. As to the not allowed, well, that's a different thing. If President Trump is upset that European safety laws restrict the use of massive SUVs and pickup trucks which roughly match the size and fuel economy of a small tank because human life is more important than the size of your engine block in Europe, boo bloody who. Also, Europeans quite like being able to drive their car down the street, and while he may not have actually bothered to, leave his resort vacation that we are all paying for to witness this, European roads are significantly narrower than US ones, and larger US vehicles just don't really fit, making them impractical for a lot of folks. It'd be like the Thomas Dotier complaining that Burkina Faso's residents aren't buying enough Icelandic wool sweaters. But all that said, Mr. President, you are entirely and totally wrong. Again. The US does sell cars to Europe, and yes, Europe does have a 10% tariff on US cars entering into the Schengen zone. In comparison, prior to President Trump's visit, the president had been planning a 25% tariff that, possibly being added on top of the existing 2.5 tariff for European vehicles, would have made things more costly, although whether it was in addition or instead of was always somewhat unclear, and with many of this government's announcements, the details seem to be somewhat of an afterthought. As of late Sunday, the new tariffs appeared to be a flat 15% on all passenger cars, which ironically undercuts the tariffs for US automakers building cars in Mexico, which is still sitting at 25%. Something brown people. Oh, and for those who care, this doesn't change the chicken tax tariff, which is still stuck rigidly at 25%. So, no, you're not going to see small pickups and vans making their way back to the US from Europe. This kind of complexity is also why, historically, we haven't had a man with a market noose of a tangerine on LSD negotiating these agreements. Instead, relying on people with a thorough understanding of policy and its impacts. But I guess you do you, boo. So let's do the wind turbine bit next. And I'm not going to lie, this particular soundbite is long and I don't want you to have to hear it all. So while we do need to play it in order to debunk it, I'm going to split it up. But I'm also going to add little timestamps every time I have to play a segment, just in case you can't deal with the thought of trying to claw your eyes or ears out or shining a light inside to activate the disinfectant you might have just injected.
The other thing I say to Europe, we will not allow a windmill to be built in the United States. They're killing us. They're killing the beauty of our scenery, our valleys, our beautiful plains. And I'm not talking about airplanes. I'm talking about beautiful plains, beautiful areas in the United States. And you look up, and you see windmills all over the place. It's a horrible thing. It's the most expensive form of energy. It's no good.
Look, some people think wind turbines are about as attractive as a root canal. But me? I mean, I grew up with windmills on the marshes of the Waveney Valley when I was a lad, and honestly, I find those giant spinning fans majestic, like nature's slow dance. They're calming. Sure, some folks complain about the noise, but guess what? Real scientists have actually studied this, and they went to school to learn the scientific method, which is more than many of the US cabinet in those so-called scientific positions can say. To quote from the US Department of Energy page before it gets memory holed for not being newspeak enough, on average, land-based utility-scale wind turbines produce sounds that fall in the range of 35 to 45 decibels when heard from 300 metres away, the closest distance a wind turbine is typically placed to a home or building. That means they are no louder than a typical refrigerator at 50 decibels and create far less noise pollution than average city car traffic, which is about 70 decibels. If President Trump could read things larger than board books, he might have discovered this before saying something so easily disproven. Most wind farms are also plopped way out in the sticks, so if you're worried about being woken up by their hum, the chances are you won't be. The studies found that a tiny number of people might feel stressed or have sleep troubles if they are ridiculously close to a wind turbine, but long-term health problems? Nada. Nothing. Zip. Zero evidence. Honestly, I'd give my left ventricle to be able to blame my sleepless nights on wind turbines. It'd beat nightmares about being rounded up and sent to concentration camps just for living out my gay agenda. In all honesty, the kicker from these studies is pretty telling. Some folks do get symptoms simply because they expect to. That's actually known as the Nocebo effect. It's basically your brain trolling you harder than that 13-year-old in CSGO who thinks teabagging is hilarious. So, lest I not forget, these studies into wind turbine noise also checked out infrasound. That's noises too low for your ears to catch, and confirmed that while some turbines do emit some of this ghostly sound, it's way below any level that could mess with your mind. Compared to the toxic cocktail of fossil fuel mining, refining and burning, which pollutes the air and makes us cough up a lung, wind turbines, and solar panels too, are basically the fairy godmothers of energy production.
They're made in China, almost all of them.
Wind turbines are not just made in China. In fact, there are major wind turbine manufacturers on every continent. And honestly, there's nothing more satisfying than fact-checking a US president using, wait for it, official government data. I might not have the same gloriously incredulous expression that Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell had last week when President Trump claimed the Fed was involved in some sort of building renovation fraud, but I promise the facts are just as obvious and just as funny. According to the US Department of Energy, I will link to it below, there are more than 500 US companies specialising in wind turbine components in the US today, making everything from rotors and turbine nacelles to motors, power electronics and towers. They are all making things for wind turbines. And I quote, "Advancements in composite materials, automation and more efficient manufacturing processes have helped domestic manufacturers dramatically increase productivity throughout the past decade. The wind supply chain that has developed in the United States in recent years has increased the domestic content of wind turbines installed in the United States, with over 80% of nacelle assembly and up to 70% of tower manufacturing occurring in the United States for turbines installed here." And if you want to see how deep US wind manufacturing goes, well, check out the Renewable Energy Materials Property Database. I will link to that down below, assuming it is, of course, still online when this video goes live. In fact, the technology that led to the massive increase in size of turbine blades, that was also invented here, in the US, by US-funded research. No Chinese companies in sight.
When they start to rust and rot in 8 years, you can't really turn them off, you can't bury them. They won't let you bury the propellers, you know, the props, because there's a certain type of fiber that doesn't go well with the land. That's what they say. The environmentalists say you can't bury them because the fiber doesn't go well with the land. In other words, if you bury it, it will harm our soil.
All right, so wind turbine blades aren't made of iron, so reminder for the class, if it's not iron or steel, it doesn't rust. Turbine blades are typically made of composite materials, carbon fibre or fiberglass. Most are designed to operate for at least 25 years, and many will last longer. And when they do reach end of life, most of a turbine is recyclable. Of the roughly 8,000 components in an average wind turbine, the overwhelming majority can be recycled, and most often are. The blades? Historically not recyclable back into raw materials, but they are also definitely not going to landfill. Instead, they are being reused, shredded and turned into structural fillers for things like concrete, barriers, pedestrian bridges, and even road noise baffles. And that's now. Several companies, including some in the US and Europe, are already manufacturing fully recyclable blades designed for closed-loop life cycles, kind of like EV batteries. The science here is improving at warp speed. Now, let us tackle the whole subsidies thing.
The whole thing is a con job. It's very expensive. And in all fairness, Germany tried it, and wind doesn't work. You need subsidy for wind, and energy should not need subsidy. With energy, you make money. You don't lose money.
The real con would be pretending fossil fuels don't get subsidies, because they absolutely, unequivocally do. According to the International Monetary Fund, fossil fuel subsidies, including indirect costs like environmental and health impacts, totaled $7 trillion in 2022 alone. That is trillion with a T. So if this is a con job, fossil fuels have been running said con job for decades at a price tag that dwarfs everything wind has ever asked for. And while we're on the subject, let's not forget that during the 2024 election, President Trump allegedly told fossil fuel executives that if they raised $1 billion for his campaign, he'd undo President Biden's climate policies. When he got into office, he started doing exactly that. Also worth noting is that the one big beautiful bill he signed included a huge amount of perks for fossil fuel companies, reopening federal oil and gas leases, reducing methane royalties, and rolling back environmental protections. If it quacks like a duck. President Trump's claim that wind turbines don't work without subsidies is patently false, thanks to economies of scale, better materials, and rapid advancements in generator and semiconductor design. Modern wind turbines are cheaper and more powerful than they've ever been. Meanwhile, fossil fuels, like what he calls clean, beautiful coal, are only getting more expensive to extract and burn. So let's look at the numbers. According to Lazard's 2024 Levelised Cost of Energy report, new wind energy costs between $24 and $75 per megawatt hour. Compare that to between $68 and $166 for new coal and $70 to $132 for new gas peaker plants. So unless you are throwing darts blindfolded at an energy pricing chart, which honestly would be probably more effective than current US policymaking, wind wins. Every time. And as we just reported on 10 last weekend, while President Trump was flying over the landmass he likes to keep threatening to liberate from a country that doesn't actually own it, of the 582 gigawatts of new renewables added to the grid globally last year, 91%, that's 529.6 gigawatts, cost less than any new fossil fuel generation built in the same period. Which is why, maybe, you shouldn't take economic advice from a man who's declared bankruptcy 6 times, including a casino. How do you bankrupt a casino? How are you doing? So far, so good? Well done. Have a puppy.
But more important than that is it ruins the landscape, it kills the birds, they're noisy. You have a certain place in the Massachusetts area that over the last 20 years had 1 or 2 whales wash ashore, and over the last short period of time, they had 18, okay? Because it's driving them loco, it's driving them crazy. Now, windmills will not come, it's not going to happen in the United States. And it's very expensive, and I would love to see. I mean, today I'm playing the best course, I think, in the world, Turnberry. Even though I own it, it's probably the best course in the world, right? And I look over the horizon, and I see 9 windmills. It's like right at the end of the 18th. I said, isn't that a shame? What a shame.
This has all been discussed so much, I'm going to go through this very quickly. Do birds get killed by wind turbines? Yes. Yes, they do. But do you know what kills far more birds every single year in the US than wind turbines? If you don't know, I'm about to tell you, and yes, I'm going to use government figures again to debunk the president. Because I can. To start, though, let's look at the number of birds killed every year by wind turbines in the US, as per the US Fish and Wildlife Service. Give or take about 250,000 every single year. And that pales into insignificance when we look at other causes of avian death in the US. Buildings, for example, claim 988 million birds every single year in the US. And that's not really buildings so much as collisions between birds and buildings. The buildings don't actually go out and hunt the birds. If buildings did start to go out and hunting birds, we'd all be in trouble. Power lines, which also do not hunt birds, at least not to my knowledge, result in about 25 million deaths a year in the US. Oil pits are responsible for up to 1 million avian deaths annually. And vehicles, well, they eclipse that dramatically, with 89 million birds unalived by trying to occupy the same physical space as a car. Fossil fuel power plants? Well, they take oil's deaths and multiply it by 14, with 14 million birds killed every single year in the US by the stuff that President Trump just loves so much. But the number one killer of birds in the US? Cats. Domestic or feral, pussies are responsible for 3.7 billion, that's with a B, bird deaths every single year. And a fair few of those are just because Mr. Fluffles is feeling a little bloodthirsty and has no intention of eating what he just killed. But you don't see President Trump calling for the banning of cars, cats, buildings or coal power plants, do you now? And here's what isn't mentioned. In many nations, including the US, when wind turbine sites are proposed, there are extensive environmental impact surveys required, often including studies on migratory birds, local populations and nesting patterns. Wind companies must also build in mitigation strategies to reduce collision risks, such as deterrence to scare away birds, and painting blades for visibility, and so much more. Those same requirements? Yeah, they don't typically apply to fossil fuel plants, oil derricks or mining sites. I wonder why. OK, let's talk about President Trump's claims about beached dead whales. If you've spent any time online recently, especially in certain political circles, you've probably heard people claim that wind farms are responsible for an increase in whale strandings and deaths along US coastlines. So let's tackle that one, shall we? According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, yes, another federal agency responsible for studying ocean and atmospheric conditions, including marine life, there is no evidence that offshore wind development activities are causing whale strandings. None. This is fun, isn't it? Using the federal agencies to show the president is talking out of his... You know, maybe President Trump is trying to kill all these agencies off because they keep debunking him. That would actually make more sense than the reasons given right now. But science? You can't kill science. Thank the gods. Of course, what you can do is pervert it and lie about it. Things that the president... Sorry, where was I? Right. Whales. Scientists have looked. In fact, they are still looking, and NOAA, for as long as it continues to exist, along with multiple marine mammal experts, have been investigating an unusual mortality event affecting several species of whales since 2016. Years before massive mega offshore wind surveys even began ramping up. So, what are they seeing as likely causes? Ship strikes. Fishing gear entanglements, climate change, driven shifts in food sources, all of which are drawing whales closer to busy shipping lanes. And as for offshore wind farms, the sonar and survey equipment used in offshore wind development is non-lethal, low intensity and highly regulated. In fact, it's nothing like the mid-frequency sonar used by navies around the world, some of which has been linked in limited circumstances to marine mammal disorientation. And even that connection is not exactly straightforward. But you know what? In fact, some of the loudest voices blaming wind turbines for whale deaths are funded by... the fossil fuel industry. Yeah, the same industry that has pumped noise, chemicals and risks into our oceans for decades. And also, according to some journalists, are partly responsible for the rise in transphobia in the world because if you're hating on the trans, you're not paying attention to climate change. So, let's be clear. If you care about whales, you should be concerned about the climate crisis. You should be concerned about ship collisions and fishing gear. Blaming wind turbines for beached whales is a little bit like blaming solar panels for sunburn, or blaming trans people for the price of eggs, or blaming bicycles for potholes, or blaming tofu for the fall of the mighty Roman Empire. Although, to be clear, I hear trans people are very good at the whole cracking egg thing. Congratulations, we are now at that point in the video where you're still here. Well done, and I hope you have enough evidence to help debunk things when that one co-worker or family member that we all have to deal with brings up next time you see them how amazingly smart our current occupant of 1800 Pennsylvania Avenue is and how we should all ban wind turbines. And at the end of his little wind turbine rant, President Trump claimed that all the smart countries are banning wind turbines, that environmentalists aren't actually environmentalists, but are in fact political hacks. I can tell you right now, categorically, that there are no countries in the world with bans on wind turbines. None. Some areas might have restrictions for various reasons, but none of those reasons are anywhere near the reasons given by President Trump. As for environmentalists being political hacks who want to cause harm to the world and to the planet and to civilizations, I think I am out of anger and I'm just tired. But I need to tell you something. Environmentalism comes from empathy. Empathy for your fellow human beings, for other beings living on the planet, human or not, and a desire to live in a way that is as minimally impactful on those other forms of life as possible. And if there's one thing that President Trump lacks more than anything else, and probably fears a whole lot too, it's empathy. Because if he can't benefit from it, he's not interested. It's no surprise that he hates policies designed to make the world better for everyone so much. Because he never learned empathy. He never learned to share. I know that in making this video, with all of that sarcasm that I just threw in, I and the team have just put an even bigger target on our backs, and in an age we find ourselves in, I know plenty will be railing against us in the comments section, but look, in the last few years, I've been threatened with guns, and with ricin, and with the FBI, and with immigration services to come and throw me in jail and disappear me to another country. And those threats, that anger, that hate, that's how bullies work. They work by trying to scare you into silence. But I've made this video knowing that I have science on my side. Science, fact, and documented proof. You can't scare those away. And we're not scared of someone who thinks that wind turbines kill whales, that electric boats will kill you when they sink, or make random claims that his uncle once taught the Unabomber. Which, by the way, there is absolutely no evidence to back up. The Unabomber went to a completely different university to the one his uncle taught at. So, the next time you hear the leader of the free world make free associations, remember, fact-checking is important. It is a skill. And as long as there are people who care, fact-checking will continue to exist. Thanks for joining us today, and if you've got thoughts, make sure you leave them in our Discord room, on our Patreon page down below, or you can reach out to us on Mastodon or Blue Sky. Thanks to the amazing list of people scrolling by on your screen right now. They're part of the massive community of supporters who make this channel possible, helping us through Patreon and YouTube, covering our bills, paying our team, and helping us to remain 100% independent. If you'd like to join them and see your name listed here, just follow the links below. We've got options available across a wide range of different price points, starting from $1.50 US a month. A massive welcome to our newest supporters: Jason Bodor, Brian Newton, Mark, Chris London, Shelley, Joshua Hemphill, Andrew Miller II, Eric Miller, Barry 2379, Wayne Rendler, Chad Johnson, L. Randolph Lee, Monica Turner, RB Singh, PG9, MK Duffer, Robin Holston, James Hollyrod, Kristen Rasmussen, BGB The Bun, Stephen Meadows, Simon Cottle, Randolph Lee, Philip Paul, Mia Hartman, Scott Matheson, John Snyder, Abelardo Conessa, Calvin Klein, HB, Treble Steffel, Jim Boyer, Jay, Rastas, Mike, Jason Hellman, Abigail, Lynn Mogren, Julian Pipe, Rochelu, Lam Nog, and Peter Coughlin. To join the list and get your shout out, become a paid Patreon member for your moment of fame, and you can even give membership to someone else. If you'd like to support us with a one-off donation, you'll find links below to make Ko-fi and Bitcoin donations, and we even have an old-fashioned PO box you can reach us at. You'll also find links to our swag store, and if you're someone who has to shop on Amazon, please consider using our affiliate link so we get the commission, not Jeff Bezos. So we can continue to focus on making our content even better and reduce burnout, we're being a little freer with our release days, but plan on dropping new content every Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday on our main channel, plus something on Sunday over on Transport Evolved Take 2. If you want more, the mighty algorithm that hates us thinks you should be watching this video, but we think this one is one you should check out. Be awesome, be kind, be intentional, and don't forget to resist. Keep evolving!